July 4th, 2024, Atlantic City Beach. Mike Tyson hadn't thrown a punch in anger for 12 years. The man Sarah was laughing with had been watching them for 3 weeks. Mike sat in his beach chair, calloused hands gripping a beer bottle, watching his girlfriend touch another man's arm. The stranger was tall, confident, wearing expensive sunglasses that couldn't hide the calculating smile. Sarah didn't see the danger. She never did. The man whispered something in Sarah's ear. She laughed louder. Then he looked directly at Mike and mouthed 2 words, "I know." 12 years of anger management, 12 years of meditation, 12 years of telling himself he was different now. All of it cracked like cheap concrete. What happened in the next 5 minutes would make headlines across 3 states. The Atlantic City police would call it the most restrained act of violence they'd ever witnessed. And Sarah would finally understand why the man she loved always flinched when children cried. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mike's beer bottle hit the sand with a dull thud. The sound was lost beneath the 4th of July chaos. Children shrieking at the water's edge, teenagers blasting music from Bluetooth speakers, families claiming their territory with colorful umbrellas and coolers. But in Mike's world, everything had gone silent except for the thundering in his chest. The stranger's lips curved into a knowing smirk as he leaned closer to Sarah. She was radiant in her yellow sundress, the one Mike had bought her for her birthday last month. The fabric caught the Atlantic breeze, and she tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, the same gesture that had made him fall for her 2 years ago outside Atlantic City Medical Center. "You're so funny," Sarah giggled, placing her palm flat against the man's chest. "Mike never tells me stories like that." The stranger's eyes never left Mike's face. "Oh, I bet Mike has plenty of stories. Don't you, champion?" The word hit Mike like a sledgehammer to the solar plexus. His vision tunneled. The beach sounds rushed back in a wave, too loud, too chaotic. A child's scream from the water made him flinch, and his right hand involuntarily clenched into the fist that had once been insured for $3 million. Sarah noticed nothing. She was lost in whatever spell this predator was weaving, completely oblivious to the fact that her boyfriend was decomposing in real time 20 feet away. Mike forced himself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count to 10. You're not that man anymore. Dr. Rodriguez's voice echoed from 1,000 therapy sessions. Violence is a choice, Michael. You always have a choice, but choices felt academic when a ghost from his past was fondling his girlfriend on a public beach. The stranger said something else. Mike couldn't hear what, and Sarah threw her head back, laughing with the kind of abandon she usually reserved for Mike's rare moments of genuine humor. Her joy felt like betrayal, even though the logical part of his brain knew she was innocent. Sarah didn't know about the manslaughter conviction. She didn't know about the underground fights that had funded his escape from New York. She didn't even know his real last name. To her, he was Mike Thompson, a construction foreman who preferred quiet nights to crowded bars, who never raised his voice, who brought her coffee every morning before her nursing shifts. She'd fallen in love with his gentleness, not knowing it was built on a foundation of controlled violence. Mike stood slowly, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across the sand. At 58, he was still built like the freight train that had demolished heavyweight divisions in another lifetime. Construction work had kept him lean and dangerous, even if the reflexes weren't quite what they'd been when he was 25 and unstoppable. The stranger noticed him approaching and straightened, finally removing those expensive sunglasses. His eyes were pale blue, predatory, familiar in a way that made Mike's stomach lurch. "Sarah!" Mike called, his voice carefully modulated. "Come here." She turned, and for a moment, confusion flickered across her features. Maybe she finally sensed the electricity in the air, the way the atmosphere had shifted from lazy summer afternoon to something darker. "Mike! This is—" She paused, realizing she didn't know the man's name. "Danny," the stranger supplied, extending his hand toward Mike with theatrical confidence. "Danny Reeves. I was just telling your lovely girlfriend about some mutual acquaintances we might have." Mike didn't take the offered handshake. He knew that name. It had been in the newspapers 12 years ago. Brother of victim seeks justice. Family demands answers. Boxing establishment covers up tragedy. We don't have mutual acquaintances, Mike said. Danny's smile widened. Oh, I think we do. Emily, for instance. Ring any bells? Sarah looked between them, finally picking up on the tension. Is everything okay? Emily Reeves, 23 years old, journalism student at NYU, in the wrong place at the wrong time when Mike's temper had exploded in that Brooklyn bar. She'd tried to break up the fight, to be a good Samaritan, and Mike's haymaker had caught her temple when she stepped between him and some punk who'd been running his mouth about fixed fights. She'd died 3 days later. Never woke up from the coma. Everything's fine, Mike lied, his voice like gravel. We were just leaving, but we just got here, Sarah protested. And the fireworks don't start for hours. Danny chuckled. Yeah, Mike, the fireworks haven't even started yet. He leaned back in the beach chair that wasn't his, making himself comfortable. Besides, I thought we could catch up, talk about old times. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time. Mike's reflection caught in Danny's sunglasses as the man put them back on, and for a split second he saw himself as he truly was. Not the gentle construction worker Sarah loved, but the killer who'd been pretending to be human for 12 years. The choice was coming, whether he wanted it or not. The salt air carried the scent of sunscreen and fried dough from the boardwalk vendors, but all Mike could smell was his own fear, metallic and sharp, like the taste of blood after a fight. He stood frozen in the sand, watching Danny Reeves settle into their beach chair as if he'd been invited to stay forever. Sarah's hand found his forearm, her fingers cool against his sun-warmed skin. Mike, you look pale. Are you feeling okay? Her touch was an anchor, pulling him back from the edge of something dark. This was what he had to lose, not just Sarah, but the man he'd become because of her. The Mike who helped elderly neighbors carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs, who volunteered at the community center teaching kids basic carpentry, who hadn't thrown a punch in anger since that night 12 years ago when everything went wrong. I'm fine, baby. The lie came easier this time, muscle memory from years of protecting her from the truth. He forced his shoulders to relax, let his fingers uncurl. Just got a little dizzy from the heat. Danny was watching this performance with obvious amusement, like a cat toying with a wounded bird. You should sit down, Mike. Take a load off. We've got so much to discuss. Sarah immediately began fussing, the way she did with difficult patients at the hospital. Here, sit on my towel. I'll get you some water. She was already digging through their cooler ice cubes clinking against bottles. You know you overheat easily. I told you to wear the hat with the brim. This was Sarah in her element, caring for people, fixing what was broken. It's what had drawn Mike to her that first day outside the medical center, when he'd been visiting his sponsor, Dr. Rodriguez, and she'd been ending her shift. She'd looked exhausted, but still stopped to help an elderly man who'd dropped his prescription bag. Mike had watched her chase pills across the parking lot in her scrubs and sneakers, laughing at herself when the wind kept scattering them. He'd fallen in love before she'd even told him her name. Now she pressed a cold water bottle against his neck, and the simple gesture nearly broke him. Sarah believed in his goodness so completely that she'd never once questioned why he paid cash for everything, why he had no social media presence, why he'd never introduced her to family or old friends. She'd accepted his explanation about growing up in foster care, about preferring to live in the present rather than dwell on the past. Better? She asked, studying his face with those sharp green eyes that missed nothing in a medical context but remained beautifully blind to his deception. Better, he confirmed, though Danny Reeves was still sitting 3 feet away like a tumor that had suddenly appeared in their perfect afternoon. Sarah settled beside Mike on the towel, her bare shoulder brushing his. She wore the coconut lotion he'd grown to associate with safety, with Sunday mornings in their tiny apartment above the deli, with the life they'd built together out of careful routine and quiet contentment. So, Danny, Sarah said, because she was incapable of letting social awkwardness fester, how do you and Mike know each other? Danny's smile was all teeth. We go way back. Don't we, champ? He leaned forward conspiratorially. Mike's being modest. He used to be quite the athlete. The word athlete felt like mockery. Mike had been a weapon, not a sportsman. In the ring, he'd been precision violence wrapped in silk shorts and endorsed by corporate sponsors. Outside the ring, he'd been a walking disaster looking for an excuse to explode. Emily Reeves had just been unlucky enough to provide that excuse. Really? Sarah turned to Mike with genuine surprise. You never told me you played sports. Before Mike could deflect, Danny jumped in. Oh, he was famous. Had his picture in all the papers. Didn't you, Mike? The beach suddenly felt like a trap. Families surrounded them on all sides. Fathers teaching daughters to build sandcastles, mothers slathering sunscreen on squirming toddlers, teenagers playing volleyball with reckless energy. Normal people living normal lives. The kind of people who would be horrified to know they were picnicking 20 feet from a convicted killer. Mike's phone buzzed. A text from Tommy, his site foreman. Inspection moved to Monday. Enjoy your holiday, brother. Brother. Tommy called him that because Mike had helped him get sober 3 years ago, had vouched for him when no other contractor would hire an ex-junkie. Tommy didn't know he was taking advice from someone whose own rock bottom had involved a young woman's skull fracturing against a bar floor. Sarah was still waiting for an answer about his athletic past, her expression caught between curiosity and concern. In the distance, the boardwalk Ferris wheel turned lazily against the blue sky, carrying couples and families up toward heaven before gently returning them to earth. Ancient history, Mike finally said. Nothing worth talking about. But Danny Reeves was already shaking his head, settling in for what was clearly going to be a very long conversation. Actually, it's very much worth talking about, Danny said, pulling out his phone with deliberate slowness. Especially since I brought pictures. The device gleamed in the afternoon sun as Danny swiped through his photo gallery. Mike's throat constricted. Around them, the beach continued its oblivious celebration. A frisbee sailed overhead, children built elaborate sand fortresses, couples shared ice cream from the boardwalk stands. But Mike felt separated from all of it by an invisible wall of dread. Here we go. Danny turned the screen toward Sarah. This was taken at Madison Square Garden, 1998. Mike was headlining that night. Mike caught a glimpse of the photograph. Himself 28 years younger, muscles gleaming under arena lights, wearing championship gold around his waist. The crowd behind him was a blur of screaming faces, hands reaching toward him like he was some kind of deity. He remembered that night, the roar of 15,000 people, the taste of his own blood, the feeling that he was invincible. 3 weeks later, Emily Reeves would be dead. Sarah's eyes widened as she looked from the photo to Mike, then back again. That's really you? Mike Tyson, Danny announced with theatrical pride. Former undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Though I guess you go by Thompson now, don't you? The name hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was already spreading. Mike watched Sarah's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been fear. Her nursing background meant she knew how to process information quickly, connect dots that others might miss. Iron Mike Tyson, she said slowly, and hearing his old nickname in her voice felt like desecration. You're that Mike Tyson. Mike's hands were shaking now. He pressed them flat against the towel, trying to anchor himself before the panic could fully take hold. Sarah, I can explain. Can you? Danny interrupted, swiping to another photo. Can you explain this one? This picture was different, grainier, clearly from a newspaper. Mike saw his own face in profile, younger and harder, being led away in handcuffs. The headline was partially visible, boxer charged in bar death. Sarah's intake of breath was sharp enough to cut. Mike, what is this? The beach sounds seemed to mock him now. Laughter from children who still believed the world was safe. Music from speakers owned by people who'd never killed anyone. Mike felt the familiar tightness in his chest that preceded the rage, the blackout fury that had destroyed everything good he'd ever touched. This is your boyfriend, Danny said conversationally, leaving Brooklyn Central booking after posting bail for manslaughter. My sister Emily's manslaughter, specifically. Your sister? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Danny nodded, his pale blue eyes never leaving Mike's face. Emily Reeves, 23 years old, journalism student, daughter, sister, human being. She tried to stop a bar fight, and your gentle construction worker here caved in her skull with one punch. Mike stood abruptly, sand cascading from the towel. That's enough. Is it? Danny rose to meet him, and Mike realized the other man was taller than he'd initially appeared, rangier. There was something predatory in his stance, like he'd been waiting for this moment for years. Because I don't think it is. I think we're just getting started. Sarah scrambled to her feet, positioning herself between them. Stop, both of you, just stop. Her nurse's training kicked in. De-escalate, assess, control the situation. Mike, is this true? The question hung between them like a blade. Mike looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and saw the exact moment when everything changed. Her expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something that broke his heart. Recognition of the stranger she'd been sleeping beside for 2 years. Sarah, he began. Is it true? She repeated, and her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to life and death honesty. Mike's phone buzzed again. Another text, but not from Tommy this time. The number was unfamiliar, the message brief, "We need to talk. Meet me at Pier 12 tonight, alone, E." His blood turned to ice water. Emily was dead. He'd watched her coffin lowered into the ground 12 years ago, had stood in the back of the cemetery while her family wept. But the message was there, glowing on his screen like an accusation. Danny noticed his reaction. Something interesting? Mike stared at the phone, his carefully constructed world crumbling like sandcastles before the tide. The message was impossible, but there it was. And somehow, seeing those words made everything else click into place. Danny's appearance here wasn't coincidence. The flirtation with Sarah hadn't been random attraction. This was orchestrated. All of it. Who are you, really? Mike asked Danny, but his voice sounded far away, like it was coming from underwater. Danny's smile was triumphant. I'm exactly who I said I was, Emily's brother. The one who spent 12 years making sure you never got to forget what you did. The phone buzzed again. Same number, time's up, Mike. Some debts can't stay buried forever. Mike's vision blurred. The beach, Sarah, Danny. Everything became fragments of a life that was already over. Mike's legs gave out. He dropped back onto the towel like a marionette with severed strings, the phone slipping from nerveless fingers into the sand. The impossible message glowed up at him. Time's up, Mike. Some debts can't stay buried forever. No, he whispered, the word barely audible over the crash of waves. She's dead. I saw them bury her. Danny crouched down, his shadow falling across Mike's face. Who's dead, Mike? Who did you see buried? But Mike couldn't answer. His mind was fragmenting, splitting between the present moment and that terrible night 12 years ago. The bar had been called Murphy's, a dive in Red Hook where off-duty cops drank next to longshoremen and nobody asked questions about the blood under your fingernails. Mike had been there to meet a promoter about an underground fight, something to keep him sharp between sanctioned bouts. The kid, barely old enough to drink legally, had recognized him, started running his mouth about fixed fights, about how the sport was rigged, about how Mike was just another corporate puppet. The smart thing would have been to walk away. Dr. Rodriguez had been working with him on de-escalation techniques, on recognizing the warning signs before the rage took over. But Mike had been drinking, and the kid wouldn't shut up. Sarah knelt beside him, her medical instincts overriding whatever horror she was processing. Mike, look at me. You're hyperventilating. Her voice was professional, distant, the way she spoke to unstable patients in the ER. In through your nose, count to 4. Hold it. Out through your mouth. He tried to follow her instructions, but the breathing exercises felt useless against the tsunami of memory crashing over him. Emily Reeves stepping between him and the kid, her hands raised peacefully, saying something about everyone just calming down. The way his fist had connected with her temple when she moved into his swing. The sound, God, the sound her head had made hitting the edge of the bar on her way down. She was trying to help, Mike said, his voice breaking. She didn't even know us, just saw a fight and tried to stop it. Danny's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features. You remember her? I remember everything. Mike's hands were shaking violently now. The paramedics, the hospital, the trial. I remember your mother screaming at me in the courthouse. I remember visiting Emily's grave every year on the anniversary until I moved here. That seemed to catch Danny off guard. He rocked back on his heels, studying Mike's face with new intensity. You visited her grave? Every fucking year. The words came out raw, scraped from someplace deep inside. Brought flowers. Sat there for hours. Your mother caught me once. Told me to stay away, that I'd done enough damage. She was right. Sarah's hand found his shoulder, but her touch felt different now. Careful, clinical. The easy intimacy they'd shared for 2 years had evaporated like morning fog. Mike, who sent you that text? He looked down at his phone, still glowing in the sand. The messages were real, the sender unknown. I don't know. It's impossible. Danny leaned closer, his earlier smugness replaced by something sharper. Let me see that. Mike wanted to refuse, but resistance felt pointless now. Everything was already ruined. He handed over the phone, watching Danny's face as he read the messages. This isn't from Emily, Danny said after a long moment. Obviously. But he scrolled through Mike's recent texts, his frown deepening. There are others, going back weeks. Sarah peered over Danny's shoulder, her nurse's practicality cutting through the supernatural dread. Look at the timestamps. They're all late at night, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and the language patterns are wrong for someone Emily's age. Mike felt a different kind of fear creeping in, colder and more familiar. What do you mean? Emily would have been 35 now if she'd lived, Danny said slowly. These texts read like they're from someone who stopped aging at 23. He looked up at Mike, and for the first time, his hostility was mixed with something else. Someone's been fucking with you. A family walked past their little circle of crisis. Parents carrying beach chairs, kids dragging boogie boards, everyone laughing about something. They belonged to the world of normal problems, sunburn and sand in their shoes. Mike envied them with an intensity that bordered on physical pain. I need to go, he said, struggling to his feet. I need to think. We're not finished, Danny called after him. Mike was already walking toward the boardwalk, leaving Sarah and the impossible messages, and Danny Reeves sitting in the wreckage of his carefully constructed piece. But Danny was wrong. They were finished. Whatever game was being played, whoever was sending those texts, Mike was done pretending he could escape what he'd done. Some debts really couldn't stay buried forever. Behind him, he heard Sarah calling his name, but he didn't turn around. He couldn't bear to see the fear in her eyes, or worse, the pity. Mike's apartment felt like a crime scene when he finally reached it 2 hours later. Every familiar object, the coffee mug Sarah had bought him for his birthday, the construction boots lined up by the door, the framed photo of them at last year's 4th of July fireworks, now seemed like evidence of an elaborate lie. He'd walked the entire length of the boardwalk twice, trying to outpace the memories that Danny's appearance had unleashed, but the ghosts had followed him home anyway. His phone sat on the kitchen counter like an unexploded bomb. 3 missed calls from Sarah, 2 voicemails he couldn't bring himself to play. The impossible texts from Emily's number had stopped, but Mike found himself checking obsessively anyway, waiting for the next message from a dead woman. The apartment was too small suddenly, the walls pressing in like a confession booth. Mike grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and immediately put it back. Alcohol had been the gasoline on the fire 12 years ago. Dr. Rodriguez would say the urge to drink was a warning sign, his psyche trying to escape rather than confront what was happening. But Dr. Rodriguez didn't know about the texts. Didn't know that Emily Reeves had somehow reached across death to drag Mike back into the past he'd spent a decade trying to bury. The landline rang, an old rotary phone Sarah had found at a thrift store and insisted was charming. Mike almost didn't answer, but the sound was so jarring in the silence that he grabbed the receiver just to make it stop. Thompson residence, he said automatically, then winced. Even that name was a lie. You shouldn't have run away. It was Sarah, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Danny told me things about what really happened that night. Mike sank into the kitchen chair, suddenly exhausted. Where are you? Does it matter? You've been lying to me for 2 years, Mike. Or should I call you something else? I don't even know what's real anymore. Through the apartment's single window, Mike could see the beach in the distance. Tiny figures, still playing in the surf despite the approaching evening. Normal people with normal secrets. Affairs, debt, petty jealousies. None of them had killed anyone. Everything about us is real, he said, knowing how hollow it sounded. Sarah, I love you. That's not a lie. But everything else is. Her voice cracked slightly, the professional composure slipping. Your name, your past, your whole identity. I've been sleeping next to a stranger." Mike closed his eyes, remembering their first real conversation outside the medical center. She'd asked what he did for work, and he'd told her construction, not technically false, but omitting the years of professional violence that had led him there. She'd said she liked honest men, men who worked with their hands to build things instead of tearing them down. "The person you fell in love with," Mike said carefully. "That's who I really am now. Who I became after you killed a woman." The words hit like physical blows. "Danny showed me newspaper articles, Mike, court records. You didn't just hurt someone in a bar fight. You took someone's daughter, someone's sister. And then you changed your name and moved here like it never happened." I served my time, but even as Mike said it, he knew how inadequate that sounded. 4 years in medium security for involuntary manslaughter, reduced sentence because of his cooperation and lack of criminal history. He'd been a model prisoner, earned his GED, started the anger management program that had changed his life. 4 years for Emily Reeves. Her whole future, marriage, children, career, dreams, reduced to 48 months of Mike lifting weights and learning to be human again. "Danny says you visited her grave," Sarah continued. "Is that true?" Yes. The admission felt like confession, like absolution might be possible if he could just explain properly. "Every year, I needed to remember what I'd done, who I'd hurt." Dr. Rodriguez said, "You're in therapy?" Surprise colored her voice. "For how long?" 12 years, since before the trial. Mike opened his eyes, focusing on the photo of them together, trying to find hope in Sarah's smile from happier times. "I've been trying to become someone worthy of redemption, someone worthy of you." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice smaller now, uncertain. "Danny says someone's been impersonating his sister, sending you messages pretending to be her." The text started 3 weeks ago. Mike found himself standing, pacing the small kitchen like a caged animal. Always late at night. Things only Emily would know about that night, about what happened after. What kind of things? But before Mike could answer, his phone buzzed with another message. This time, the sender wasn't Emily's number. It was a photo. The image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, revealing a woman with dark hair sitting in what looked like a hospital waiting room. The woman was Sarah. The timestamp showed it was taken 20 minutes ago. Mike's blood turned to ice. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the kitchen floor as the image burned into his retinas. Sarah, sitting in what he now recognized as Atlantic City Medical Center's waiting area, looking directly at the camera with an expression of confusion and growing alarm. "Mike? Mike, are you there?" Her voice echoed from the dropped phone, tinny and distant. He scrambled to retrieve it, hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the device. "Sarah, where are you right now? Exactly where are you?" "I'm at the hospital. I came in to pick up some files and Danny wanted to see where I worked." "Why? What's wrong?" The second text arrived before Mike could answer. "Same unknown number. She's beautiful when she's scared. Just like Emily was." Mike's vision blurred, the apartment tilting around him like a ship in rough seas. Someone was watching Sarah, right now. Someone who knew about Emily, who had been sending those impossible messages, who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. "Get out," Mike said into the phone, his voice barely recognizable. "Sarah, get out of the hospital right now. Find security, find people, don't go anywhere alone." "What are you talking about?" "Mike, you're scaring me." But Mike was already moving, grabbing his keys, his wallet, anything that might help him reach her faster. The phone buzzed again as he headed for the door, too late. "We're already talking." He stopped dead in the hallway outside his apartment. If someone was with Sarah right now, if they had his number and were sending these messages in real time, then whoever was behind this wasn't just some cruel prankster. This was planned, coordinated. Mike called Sarah back, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried 3 more times during the sprint to his truck, each unanswered ring driving the panic deeper into his chest. The hospital was 12 minutes away if he broke every traffic law in Atlantic City. He made it in 7. The medical center's lobby was nearly empty, just a few visitors and staff moving through the sterile space with the unhurried pace of evening shift change. Mike burst through the automatic doors like a man on fire, scanning the waiting area where the photo had been taken. No Sarah, no sign of struggle. But her purse was sitting on one of the blue plastic chairs abandoned. "Excuse me." Mike grabbed the arm of a passing nurse. "Sarah Martinez. She works here. Have you seen her tonight?" The nurse looked startled, then concerned. "Are you family?" "Sarah left about 15 minutes ago with some man. They seemed to be having an intense conversation." Mike's heart stopped. What man? What did he look like? Tall, thin, pale. Said he was her boyfriend's friend. The nurse's expression shifted to alarm as she took in Mike's obvious distress. Should I call security? But Mike was already running toward the exit, his mind racing through possibilities. Danny had been with Sarah when she called. Danny, who claimed to be Emily's brother, but had appeared out of nowhere 3 weeks ago, exactly when the impossible texts had started. Danny, who somehow knew where Sarah worked, where Mike lived, intimate details about the night Emily died. Mike's phone rang as he reached the parking lot. Sarah's number. "Sarah? Are you okay? Where are—" "Hello, Mike." The voice was male, calm, amused. "Not Sarah at all." "Who is this? Where's Sarah?" "Oh, she's fine. For now. We're taking a little ride together, having a conversation about truth and consequences. You know how I feel about those topics." Mike gripped the phone so hard he thought it might shatter. "If you hurt her, I swear to God—" "You'll what? Kill me like you killed Emily?" A laugh, cold and sharp. "That's the beautiful thing about being dead, Mike. Makes you wonderfully difficult to kill." The world tilted sideways. Mike leaned against his truck, legs suddenly unsteady. "That's impossible." "Is it? Or is it just impossible for you to accept that some ghosts don't stay buried?" The voice grew softer, almost intimate. "I've been watching you, Mike, for years, waiting for the right moment to remind you that redemption isn't something you get to choose, it's something you earn." Mike's throat closed up. The voice was wrong, too deep, too controlled. But there was something underneath it, some quality that made his skin crawl with recognition. "Emily's dead. I saw her funeral." "You saw a funeral. But you never saw the body, did you? Never got close enough to verify what was actually in that pretty white coffin." A pause. "Funny how easy it is to disappear when everyone wants to forget you existed." The parking lot spun around Mike like a carnival ride. 12 years of guilt, therapy, and carefully constructed penance suddenly felt hollow, built on a foundation of lies he'd never thought to question. "Meet us at the old Murphy's location in Red Hook," the voice continued. "1 hour. Come alone, or Sarah starts paying for your sins too." The line went dead, leaving Mike standing in the empty parking lot with the taste of copper in his mouth and the growing certainty that everything he thought he knew about that night, about Emily, about justice, about his own guilt, had been carefully orchestrated fiction. Emily Reeves was alive, and she wanted him to remember exactly how good he was at destroying everything he touched. Mike stood frozen in the hospital parking lot, the phone dead in his hand, Emily's impossible words echoing in his skull. "Funny how easy it is to disappear when everyone wants to forget you existed." The old Murphy's location, he knew it. A shuttered seafood restaurant in Red Hook that had been abandoned for 3 years, its windows boarded up like blind eyes, 20 minutes away if he drove like a man possessed, which he would because Sarah was there, trapped with someone who claimed to be dead, someone who had been pulling strings in his life for weeks without him knowing. But first, he needed to understand what he was walking into. Mike scrolled through his contacts until he found Dr. Rodriguez's emergency line. His therapist answered on the second ring, professional concern immediate in her voice. "Mike, it's nearly 9 p.m. What's happening?" "Emily Reeves," Mike said without preamble. "The woman I killed. I need to know everything about her death. Everything you know, everything in my file." A pause. "Mike, we've discussed this extensively. Emily died from traumatic brain injury sustained during—" "Did you see the body?" "What?" "Did anyone we know personally verify that Emily Reeves was actually dead? Or did we just trust the system, the paperwork, the official reports?" Mike was pacing now, his mind racing through 12 years of assumed facts. "Someone just called me claiming to be her. Someone who knows details about that night that only she would know. Dr. Rodriguez's voice shifted to her emergency protocol tone. Calm, grounded, designed to talk people off ledges. Mike, grief and guilt can manifest in many ways. Perhaps someone is using your trauma against you, manipulating. They have Sarah. The words came out broken, desperate. Someone has my girlfriend, and they're claiming to be Emily Reeves, and they want to meet at some abandoned restaurant to talk about redemption. So I need to know, did Emily Reeves actually die that night, or have I been living a lie for 12 years? The silence stretched long enough for Mike to hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. When Dr. Rodriguez finally spoke, her voice was careful, uncertain. I never personally verified her death, no. I was brought into your case after the trial, after you'd already been convicted. Everything I know about Emily came from court transcripts, police reports, medical examiner files. Another pause. Mike, what aren't you telling me? But Mike was already hanging up, his mind spinning through implications that made his chest tight with something worse than panic. If Emily had somehow survived, if she'd been alive all these years while he grieved her death, visited her empty grave, rebuilt his entire identity around the guilt of killing her, then what did that make him? What did that make the last 12 years? His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah's number. Stop wasting time. She's getting impatient. Attached was another photo. Sarah sitting in what looked like the back seat of a car, her hands zip-tied together, her eyes wide with fear but alive, alert, angry. Even terrified, she looked like she was planning to fight back the moment she got the chance. Mike started his truck and peeled out of the parking lot, heading toward Red Hook and whatever waited for him there. But as he drove, fragments of memory began surfacing, details about that night he'd buried so deep that even Dr. Rodriguez hadn't been able to excavate them. The sound Emily's head had made hitting the bar, too hollow, too sharp, like hitting metal instead of wood. The way the paramedics had seemed almost relieved when they couldn't find a pulse, like they'd been expecting bad news. The closed casket funeral he'd watched from across the cemetery, too far away to see the mourners clearly, to verify who was actually grieving. And Danny who claimed to be Emily's brother but looked nothing like her. Danny whose last name was Reeves but whose knowledge of Emily seemed strangely clinical, like facts memorized from files rather than memories lived with family. Mike's hands tightened on the steering wheel as a terrible possibility crystallized. What if Danny wasn't Emily's brother at all? What if he was working with whoever had Emily, or whoever was pretending to be Emily? What if this entire confrontation, from the beach to the hospital to this midnight meeting, had been orchestrated to bring Mike to exactly this moment? The old Murphy's restaurant emerged from the darkness ahead, its broken sign hanging at an angle that suggested violence rather than weather damage. One car sat in the potholed parking lot, a black sedan with tinted windows that reflected Mike's headlights like dark mirrors. Mike parked 20 feet away and killed the engine. Through the sedan's windshield, he could see two figures in the front seat. Sarah in the back, visible through the rear window, still alive. His phone rang one final time. Ready to learn the truth about that night, Mike? About what really happened when you thought you killed me? Mike stepped out of his truck and walked toward the car, toward Sarah, toward whatever Emily Reeves had become in 12 years of supposed death. I'm ready, he said. The car door opened with a soft click that seemed to echo in the empty parking lot. The figure who stepped out moved with careful deliberation, like someone who had rehearsed this moment countless times. In the dim light from Mike's headlights, he could see it was a woman, tall, angular, with dark hair that caught the shadows. But the face that turned toward him wasn't Emily Reeves. It was close, frighteningly close. But 12 years of staring at Emily's photograph, of carrying her memory like a stone in his chest, had burned her features into Mike's soul. This woman was a reconstruction, a careful approximation built from surgical precision and studied mannerisms. Hello, Mike. Her voice was Emily's voice, but wrong somehow, like hearing a song played in a different key. You look older. Mike kept walking forward, each step measured and controlled despite the chaos in his chest. Behind him, he could hear the soft crunch of gravel as Danny emerged from the passenger seat. Not Emily's brother. Never Emily's brother. Where is she? Mike's voice was steady, but his hands had unconsciously curled into fists at his sides. "Where's Emily Reeves?" The woman smiled, and for a terrible moment, the expression was so perfectly Emily that Mike's breath caught. Still worried about her after all these years? How romantic. She gestured toward the abandoned restaurant behind her. "She's waiting inside. She's been waiting for 12 years to have this conversation. That's impossible." "Is it?" The woman circled him slowly, predatory and confident. "Or is it impossible for you to accept that your guilt has been built on a lie? That everything you've suffered, every moment of redemption you've clawed for, has been meaningless?" Through the sedan's rear window, Mike could see Sarah struggling against her restraints, her eyes locked on his with desperate urgency. She was trying to tell him something, mouthing words he couldn't make out in the darkness. "Let her go," Mike said. "This is between us." "But that's where you're wrong." The woman stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same scent Emily had worn that night at Murphy's, sweet and floral, and now sickening with memory. "Sarah isn't innocent in this. She's been part of the design from the beginning." Mike's world tilted. "What? Did you really think it was coincidence that a nurse who specialized in brain trauma recovery happened to fall in love with you? That she happened to work at the same hospital where Emily Reeves spent 6 months learning to walk again, to speak again, to remember her own name?" The words hit like physical blows. Mike staggered backward, his carefully constructed reality crumbling around him. "No. Sarah doesn't know about Emily. She doesn't know who I am. Doesn't she?" Danny spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle finally solved. "Ask her, Mike. Ask her why she really approached you that day outside the medical center. Ask her why she keeps photos of her patients in her personal files. Ask her why she's been documenting your psychological progress for over 2 years. Mike turned toward the car, toward Sarah, and saw the truth written in her expression. Not fear, guilt. Desperate, anguished guilt. She had known, all of it, from the beginning. "The real Emily Reeves died 6 hours after you hit her," the woman continued, her voice gentle now, almost kind. "Massive cerebral hemorrhage. Brain dead before the ambulance reached the hospital. But her body lived for another 3 days on life support, while her family decided whether to donate her organs." Mike's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees on the broken asphalt, 12 years of guilt and redemption collapsing into something far worse, the realization that he had been performed for, studied, manipulated by the only person he thought he could trust. "Sarah was Emily's neurological rehabilitation nurse," Danny said, moving to stand beside the woman. "She watched Emily die, watched her family grieve, and when she learned that the man who killed her patient was living peacefully just 20 miles away, she decided that justice required a more personal touch." The woman knelt beside Mike, her surgically altered face kind and terrible in the darkness. "I'm Dr. Victoria Chen. I've been Sarah's colleague for 3 years. When she asked me to help her understand the mind of the man who destroyed her patient's life, I thought she meant professionally." Mike looked up at her, seeing now how carefully she had been crafted to resemble Emily. The texts, the phone calls, all Sarah. She needed you destabilized, confused, ready to confess everything when confronted with your victim. Dr. Chen's voice carried professional curiosity. "She's been documenting your psychological patterns, your triggers, your capacity for violence, building a case that your rehabilitation was incomplete, that you remained dangerous." Through the car window, Mike could see Sarah crying now, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "But here's what she didn't expect," Dr. Chen continued, standing and brushing dust from her knees. "She fell in love with you anyway, and that's going to destroy everything she's built." Mike remained on his knees in the broken parking lot, the weight of 2 years of lies pressing down on him like the Atlantic City sky before a storm. Sarah's sobs carried through the car windows, each sound a small death of everything he thought he'd built. "Let me talk to her," he said finally, his voice hollow. Dr. Chen stepped aside without protest. Danny opened the sedan's rear door, and Sarah stumbled out, her hands still bound but her eyes fierce despite the tears. She looked at Mike kneeling there among the glass and weeds, and something in her face broke completely. "I never meant to fall in love with you," she whispered. "It was supposed to be clinical, observational, Justice for Emily. Mike stood slowly, feeling every one of his 58 years in his bones. How long have you known who I am? From the first day. I saw you visiting the memorial garden outside the hospital, the same day every year, August 15th. Sarah's voice was raw, stripped of pretense. I researched you, found your therapy records, your parole reports. I thought I was hunting a monster who'd learned to hide. And what did you find instead? Sarah looked at him for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time not the man she'd been studying, but the man she'd actually known. Someone who'd already destroyed himself more completely than I ever could. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. Sarah documented everything, Mike. Your nightmares, your panic attacks, the way you count to 10 before responding when you're angry. She was building a psychological profile to prove you were still dangerous. But I kept finding the opposite, Sarah said, stepping closer despite her restraints. You're not the man who killed Emily. Maybe you never were. Maybe you were just a boy who made a terrible mistake and spent 12 years turning it into a life sentence. Mike thought of all the mornings Sarah had watched him make coffee, all the evenings she'd listened to him talk about work, about small frustrations and smaller joys. She'd been studying him like a specimen, but somewhere in that observation, something real had grown. The texts, the photos, that was you? I wanted to see how you'd react under pressure, whether the violence would surface again. Sarah's voice broke. But when you got that first message, you didn't get angry. You got terrified. Terrified that you might have hurt someone else. Danny stepped forward, impatient. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change what he did. Emily is still dead. Yes, Mike said quietly. She is. He looked around the abandoned lot, at the boarded-up restaurant where Emily had laughed and flirted and lived her last conscious moments. The guilt would always be there. Not the manufactured guilt Sarah had been documenting, but the real grief for a life cut short, for potential never realized. I killed her, Mike continued. Not the version of her you've created, not the ghost you've been chasing, but a real person with a real life. And I've spent 12 years learning how to carry that weight, without letting it crush everyone around me. Dr. Chen was watching this exchange with clinical fascination. So what happens now? Sarah's research is already submitted to the parole board. Your psychological evaluation has been compromised. The authorities will have questions. Mike looked at Sarah, really looked at her, seeing both the woman he'd loved and the stranger who'd been documenting his every move. What do you want to happen? Sarah was quiet for a long time, her bound hands trembling. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I want Emily to rest. I want to stop punishing both of us for something that can't be changed. And us? There is no us, Sarah said, but gently. There can't be. We're both too broken by this, too tangled up in lies and guilt and things that can't be forgiven. Mike nodded, understanding flooding through him like relief. She was right. They had loved each other through a fiction, and fiction couldn't survive the weight of truth. Danny cut Sarah's restraints with sharp, angry movements. Dr. Chen was already walking back toward the sedan, her part in this elaborate performance apparently over. Mike realized they were all going to walk away from this parking lot as different people than they'd been when they arrived. Will you be okay? He asked Sarah. Eventually. She rubbed her wrists where the zip ties had been. Will you? Mike looked up at the starless sky, thinking of all the weight he'd been carrying and all the weight he could finally set down. Eventually. Sarah walked toward Danny's car without looking back. Mike stood alone in the empty lot, feeling the ghost of Emily Reeves finally settling into stillness. Not forgiveness. That would take more time than he had left, but perhaps something like peace. In the distance, the Atlantic City boardwalk glittered with late-night neon, the same lights that had witnessed his first steps toward redemption 12 years ago. Tomorrow, he would begin again.